Good evening, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I am your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night we talked about English equals madness, where we native English-speaking people who travel around the world notice that madness is a way of life in English-speaking countries. While countries where English is not the first language, they seem to be relatively calm, intelligent, and rational thinking people. Very little game playing and a lot more awareness of their surroundings, their environment, their government, and their culture than we English-speaking natives seem to be. It's actually so obvious to those of us English-speaking people who travel that the idea of actually returning to our own countries, to that insanity, that madness, it's quite literally unthinkable. I certainly don't want to. My goal is never to set foot in the United States ever again. I don't want to. I won't do it. I mean, if there's a lot of money involved, sure. Do I want to have anything really to do with the average American? No, I really don't. Certainly not the average American woman. That's a nightmare I can live without, thanks. Don't want to do it. Tonight, I thought we would chat about Americans as equity and how those very transparent borders we have in the United States that anybody can walk through and in will very, very, very soon become very, very real. And it won't be to keep foreigners out. It will be to keep Americans in. And here's why. About 100 years ago, a U.S. president, Theodore Roosevelt, passed a law. And that law was that every American, every man, woman, and child, was pledged as equity against the debts of the United States. Which means that you and I are not just cattle, we are, in law, the property of the United States government. Which gets us back to British Admiralty law, which the United States has been operating under since the 1930s, when the U.S. government declared bankruptcy and gave our country to the British banks. Now this goes back even further to the first American Civil War, where it was the law where black people, Negroes, were considered property. Now the slave trade was created by British bankers. British bankers financed ships to go to Africa, hire one group of black Africans to kidnap and enslave, go to war against other groups of black Africans, sold them to the white slavers who were backed by British banks, and then transported to the United States, to the colonies as labor. There was a law in the United States that said that was okay to own people. Now in Africa, it's perfectly normal for slavery to happen from one tribe to another because in tribal culture, no matter what the name of your tribe is, it always translates to the people. And if you belong to one tribe, you are people. Everybody else is an animal. So the concept of slavery is ancient beyond history because you think you're people and everybody else isn't. So it was okay with the black Africans who sold what we would think of as their brothers to British slavers. But to the black Africans, they were another tribe. They were just, well, cattle. That law that said that people could own other people has never been taken off the books in the United States. In fact, when you go to apply for a marriage license in the United States, what you're doing is you are applying to your master, literally the U.S. government, for the right to marry. And when you sign that certificate, that marriage certificate, you are actually, and you can look this up, you are actually pledging that any children you have will also be property of the U.S. government. Now, as I always say, please, for the love of the goddess, don't believe anything I say. This is the time you go talk to your best friend in the world, your local reference librarian, and ask them to help you look this up. You may actually have to go to the law library at the university. The law is there. You got to go find it. Now today, after the hedge fund disaster a disaster that was actually outlawed after the last crash of the American economy in 1929, but was a few years ago reinstated. Because of the hedge fund disaster, the Chinese government own most of the United States now. The debt, at least. British banks and British corporations own us, but they have debts, and those debts are owned by the Chinese government. So what, in the end, was pledged as equity to cover all of this debt? You and me. Again, this is something that you can prove for yourself, and you certainly don't need me to do it. This is actually really simple. It's going to cost you, I think, 15 bucks. Excuse me. Go online and order a brand new copy of your birth certificate. Lots of companies provide this service, and I say it's about 15 bucks. Now, once you get a new copy, hard copy of your birth certificate, you will find a series of numbers printed on it, and they're inside of a little circle. I don't have my copy of my birth certificate handy, so I don't remember exact placement, but it's there, and you can easily find it. It's a series of numbers inside of a little circle. Now, call a stockbroker, any stockbroker, and ask them to check the activity on that particular stock. That's all you say. Don't say anything else. Just tell them, look, I want you to look up this number on this stock, tell me what the activity is. You will discover that you are indeed an asset. You are a stock, and that you, or rather your signature, has been traded on the major stock exchanges. You are property. You are chattel. You are cattle. In my dealings with the IRS, and frankly, they used to scare me to death, and frankly, that always puzzled me. Why am I afraid of my own government? Turns out that the IRS and most major departments of the U.S. government are all actually offshore corporations. They're all privately owned and operated offshore. Again, for fun, go online, go to Dun & Bradstreet, and look up your local courthouse or your local police department. You will find that they are not government agencies. Instead, you will discover that they are all offshore corporations and are all privately owned. In the case of your local courthouse, guess who owns that corporation? The judges and the attorneys who work there. They have a vested financial interest in getting you into their courtrooms. We'll talk more about that later. We have all been sold out, and at every level of our lives. And the IRS, well, my attorney, before her business was completely destroyed, my attorney issued a bond to cover my debts to an offshore corporation, the IRS. IRS, by the way, is actually based in Puerto Rico, and I have the address if you want it. Excuse me. And you know what? The IRS accepted the bond that my attorney issued them. You know why? Turns out they don't actually want the money. They want the right to use my signature. Again, do you know why? Because hedge funds are based on our signatures, our stock numbers on our birth certificates. And they're bought and sold in bulk over and over again. It's a con game. It's a shell game. And you and I are pledged as the equity to all these debts that the British corporations who own the United States owe now to the Chinese government. And the Chinese are going to want to collect, which means that the borders will be closed. And Americans, the cattle, the equity for those trillions and trillions of dollars in debt, well, you know, you can't have your equity disappearing on you, can you? And what are we pledged for? What do they get because they own us? They get our labor as slaves. Yes, this might be a really good time to get a passport and start looking around for friends overseas you can visit, because if we follow the game plan, the great work that's been laid out by our masters in Wisconsin, where elected officials are breaking the very laws that got them elected, then the fuse has been lit. How do I know this? Well, basic physics. We've often talked about how our masters worship Satan. Whether she exists or not doesn't matter. our masters worship Satan, and that under their religion, under their beliefs, under their laws, the master's laws, they must have written permission for everything they do to us. We must agree to allow them to abuse us. It has to be in writing. They must follow the written law. It doesn't matter if the law is good or bad. It must be obeyed because it's the law. It's the contract that our masters have signed in blood, our blood, with their god, Satan. And it seems the Republican state senators in Wisconsin, who worship black magic, who worship Satan, seem to have forgotten that. Or they were set up to forget it. As we talked about earlier, the masters will do anything to achieve their great work, including selling out their own. And so the Republican senators, state senators in Wisconsin, have broken the covenant with their own God. And Satan, Lucifer, if she really does exist, believe it or not, she has to follow the same laws. Which means we're looking for a free-for-all. Which means that we are in a staged event. Which means that the Republican state senators, the demon worshippers, they've been sacrificed for the benefit of the great work. All bets are off. I'd run for the hills if I were you. Or get a passport and just run. Which gets us back to the question, as it always does. Do you actually have a plan? Will you get a passport and leave the country, or will you just grab a gun and some food and your woman and run for the hills? What are you going to do? For the love of the gods, have a plan. Now would be a really good time to think of one. Think of something, think of anything to save yourselves, save your family, save your friends. The United States is dead. Forget about it. Save yourselves if you can. You know that we have a plan here in Europe, and it's called The Village, and it's growing even now. And I'm sorry, I really am. There's no room for you in our village unless you have lots of cash. It's just the grim reality of it. And I really am sorry. But this is just the truth. Good luck to us all. For all of us here at the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk, wishing you a really good day and reminding you please keep at least that one good thought. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel finding his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race, their black magic, captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.